Welcome to the 11th episode of the second series of the Women in CX podcast, a series dedicated to real talk conversations between women in customer experience. Listen in as we share our career stories, relive the moments that shaped us, and voice our opinions as loudly as we like about all manner of CX subjects. I'll be your host, Clare Muscutt, and in today's episode, I'll be talking to a senior woman from the insights world about how to use CX insight and metrics to drive action. Let me introduce you to today's inspiring guest. She started a career working in public sector research before moving into customer experience 7 years ago. She's held a number of senior marketing and commercial roles within CX agencies and is currently the commercial director within a leading CX consultancy arm of Kantar. She's a regular speaker and judge within the CX industry and is passionate about showing the benefits of delivering exceptional customer experiences. Please welcome to the show, CX sister Chloe Woogler. Hey Chloe.
Hi Claire, how are you?
I'm awesome. How are you doing today?
Yeah, really well, thank you.
Super. Welcome.
I like the Christmas tree.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, I think you're going to be the episode just before Christmas, so
Very good.
Have you got your decorations up?
Yeah, looking very festive in this house now.
Yeah. Because I'm going to be spending Christmas by myself. I think I've got a bit overboard because my lounge now resembles some kind of grotto.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, well, I put the Christmas tree up and I was just like, I could just do with some little lights over there. So I went and bought some more, and then maybe that corner as well. And literally now my whole lounge is like Santa's grotto.
That's amazing. It's going to bring you so much Christmas cheer.
Yeah. Like, I know, quite enjoyed it. So turning the big lights off, putting the fairy lights on, watching Christmas films. Got my own little den. It's perfect.
Oh, lovely.
Well, anyway, welcome to the Women in CX podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And welcome to all the listeners too. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today because we've been talking about doing it forever, haven't we?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I've been so inspired by following what you've been up to on this as well. So great to be here.
Oh, amazing. And today we're going to have a conversation about how insight and metrics can help to drive action in business, and also hear a bit about your career story. Is that all good?
Perfect. Sounds good.
Super. So let's start there then. Please can you tell us about your journey into customer experience and how you ended up becoming the commercial director at Kantar?
So I started my career working in public sector research, actually, which was great because it gave me a really good grounded base of how to handle large public sector style programs, and also generally what it's like working with large organizations. So I was working at Chime at the time, so Chime Communications, and they started a CX agency, which started out as one person, and then the MD quickly built it up to a successful agency. And that was really great to see a business grow from scratch. And sort of where they got to in terms of 20 people at one point, and then that's where I came over. They needed that sort of dedicated marketing and new business support, so that's where I fell into my career of CX.
Amazing.
I'd always felt really passionately though that that consumer feedback and really understanding what consumers were feeling about an interaction needed to be gathered in real time. So it was always something that as soon as I started out in research, I was really excited by CX.
Okay, so that's a bit of a combination then of the actual practical insights and application and also business development before you headed off to Kantar.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, I think the CX landscape went through a huge change, didn't it? I mean, it went through a huge change throughout probably from about 2011 to where we are now, but definitely between 2013 and 2015. It was drastic. Brands all of a sudden wanted to move away from that traditional methodologies like postal and CATI, and real time really became the number one priority. So yeah, it was a really exciting time for me.
And what are you seeing out there at the moment in terms of insight trends? Are we ever going to get away from MPS? I'm just going to ask the question outright.
Yeah. I mean, I think not. And I've got lots of views on metrics, which we can explore later. But yeah, I think there's a definite need for there always to be more than just MPS. You can't, as a brand, rely solely on MPS, and other metrics absolutely have got to come into the fold. And I've really seen that actually. So I joined Kantar in 2019, and it had really been an agency that I'd had my eye on for a long time, and I'd been speaking to, mainly because I saw them at lots of conferences, and you and I go to a lot of conferences all the
Mm.
time, and I was so impressed by their client list and thinking, wow, they're really sort of leading the CX space in terms of the brands that they're working for. So yeah, it had been a company I've been looking at for a long time, and then had quite an interesting interview process, actually, sort of a few glasses of wine with the MD, and then a couple of more formal interviews, and I was offered the role. So haven't looked back since.
Oh, amazing. And tell us more about these glasses of wine then. So
Yeah, exactly.
you just met kind of informally first, and then that led.
Yeah, so we knew each other sort of from that conference circuit, as we sort
Yeah.
of had and sort of known each other for a couple of years, and yeah, then sort of we had that conversation, and it was that sort of point when I really knew, when I sort of heard their sort of
Yeah.
full client list and things like that, that I was really excited. And look, I've been given some incredible opportunities within Kantar, sort of to help raise my profile within the CX space, but
Yeah.
also sort of the capabilities that Kantar has. So it's been great seeing how a big agency works, and definitely for me, one of the key things that stands out, I mean, there's lots of different things, but is always having something to say. I mean, we collect data about so many different interactions for our thought leadership and across the whole of Kantar, that we've always got a wealth of data to take to our clients, which is really impressive.
Okay, so I guess for anyone who's not familiar with Kantar, could you just tell us a bit more about what you do?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So Kantar are a data giant. They cover lots of different spaces, but predominantly I work within the insights part, which has a big CX agency, which is where I'm part of. But we've got lots of other parts of that. So brand tracking, we've got innovation, media. So it's a sort of a really broad spectrum of what it covers within insights.
I always remember when I worked at Sainsbury's, the Kantar data was the thing we'd always be waiting for, because
Yeah.
that had the biggest impact on our numbers. But that was like a benchmark comparison between the big four grocery retailers.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so that's through our retail practice, which is
Yeah.
which is still going very strong. And we've got then our world panel data, which collects millions and millions of shopper data as well, which is really
Right.
interesting. So it's having all that data that you can take to clients, and sort of showing that sort of understanding of their business and their market, but before even a conversation, is really exciting.
Okay. And is it like would you say it's a data and software company or?
So, to an extent, on the CX side, we work with Qualtrics and Medallia as our two partners for software. So we don't have our own CX platform, mainly because, and we'll definitely come on to talking about this later, I'm sure. But there's a huge divide between, yes, the software is absolutely an enabler of helping you gather feedback, but it's definitely not the thing that drives action. So we're very much in that action-oriented space, and that's why we've got these sort of global partnerships with Qualtrics and Medallia, so that we've got that feedback, that we can, that feedback platform that we can take to our clients, but we have that data and that grounded in terms of driving action.
Okay. And what were those environments like to work in, these big agencies and insight companies?
So they were really good. I mean, I've spent quite a lot of my time networking, as you have, so on the conference circuit, and there's definitely something sort of more male culture orientated that's associating with networking, as you've
Mm.
probably seen as well. So that more sort of relationship building in the commercial world, it is definitely sort of tailored to men, I feel. So whether that's staying for beers or going for a curry after a conference or meeting, but definitely sort of being more inclined to identify those bonding activities, which I'm really keen to do. And although probably maybe more so when there's sort of champagne involved, but there's definitely an element of them being sort of more tailored towards men, and especially as a mum with two children, sort of them maybe having that perception that I can't do those things, which of course is in fact untrue. You definitely need sort of a supportive network around you to be able to do them, but absolutely something that I really enjoyed doing. So yeah, I've seen that perception, but I think definitely when I think about it from a sort of female perspective, and sort of from having two small children, as I said, something that stuck with me was something I was told by one of the senior leaders when I was working at Chime, actually. Was she said, absolutely, you need to be doing all of these things, you need to be seen, but limit your evenings out to no more than 2 a week, so that you can
Okay.
spend enough time at home with your family and things like that, which of course I've done. So although I want to be really successful in my career, obviously, you need to have a good balance between family there as well.
Yeah, I remember my days working in business development, but I've always worked in CX, so they kind of wheeled me out to potential clients as, this girl's going to help explain to you why you should choose us because of our skills in customer experience and service and what we could do for you. This is like B2B sales in the service industry, so hospitality, reception services, that kind of thing. And there was a lot of drinking went on.
There really is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there is. So it was like client entertaining, which always
Yeah.
came with food and a lot of booze.
Food and drink.
Yeah, I was in my early 20s at that point though, but I don't think I could handle it now.
Yeah, I know. You do have to definitely take a little bit step back the older you get. I've definitely found that. But,
Yeah.
on the whole, I've seen it as a very friendly landscape. And, it was obviously quite male dominated, especially in the tech space as well. But I think, they don't exclude women. There's no danger of that. I've probably actually had one or two cases where women have been slightly less friendly, actually.
Yeah.
And I suppose by that, I mean, not being inclusive or helping other people to develop and grow. And it is rare, but I mean, something I've really stood by is making sure your career is only a success if you've taken other people on that journey. So I've always been really committed to helping and growing other people's talent as much as I can. And I've had some amazing mentors over my career as well who've really helped me work out things like values and what I want to achieve. And both men and women and some of the men have been really genuinely supportive and great role models that have encouraged me to achieve my goals. And definitely my current MD is one of those now. And I actually think him having a female CEO is a huge part of that as well. So, because he reports into a female, he gets it, he understands it, and he doesn't have any of those perceived perceptions about, my networking capabilities to stay out, until the early hours or things like that when needed with clients.
Yeah. Okay. So you got a female CEO at Kantar.
Yeah, we have. Yeah. So she's worked her way up through Kantar actually. So she's incredible, and she's been a real inspiration to me. She's really, really good at being, inclusive in terms of what she wants from the workforce, but
Yeah.
also in helping our clients as well. So she leads lots of our work around, women in finance and things like that as well. Lots of our thought leadership. So yeah, it's been great to work for a women CEO.
Yeah, not many of us get the chance to do that, hey?
No, exactly. And that's the point, as I said to you, I've seen so many examples of people trying to help people, and we really do that. But you do get the one or two which I think you just need to remember, goodness, your career is a journey, and for you and for everyone else, you need to take people on that journey with you.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I'm most proud about building the community for women in CX is being able to shine a light and really easily help and support each other. But I think networking is so important. And now we can't go to conferences.
Yeah,
It's not
absolutely.
the same online, like going to an
It's
event.
really not.
You don't get the FaceTime. I know that people have been setting up like little Zoom rooms to have conversations, but it is not the same. So
It's not the same.
and
No.
finding ways to network outside of the traditional conferences and events, depending on what happens with the vaccine next year. Long may it continue.
Yeah.
Having those having more deep conversations, I guess. But for me, it's relied upon feeling brave enough to reach out and ask questions. Ask for someone, would you mind spending 30 minutes to have a conversation with me, and building the relationship outside of the traditional channels? And I know since the pandemic, I know so many more people on a much more personal level because of Zoom and being able to
Yeah.
have Zooms.
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
I,
And do you know
I,
what? I think those behaviors will stick, Claire. I really do. I
yeah,
think
I
that,
want them to continue.
yeah, I think we'll go back to live events, and I'm really rooting for that actually, because I
Yeah.
think there's nothing the same as standing having a coffee, or being able to sit and have lunch with someone. So really rooting for live events to come back in that sense. But I don't think we'll be at any, as the same level as client meetings as we were,
No.
before the pandemic, because it works, doesn't it? You've
Yeah.
seen that it really does work.
Yeah. I think in comparison to before the pandemic, I'm far more connected with people in the CX community because of the pandemic,
Yeah.
and because we all started to have like Zooms and WhatsApp little groups and that kind of thing. So yeah, I agree with you. Networking is really important, especially for women.
Yeah, absolutely. And, build your network as well, which, you've done so well at doing, but, make sure that you've built your network and don't just rely on people sort of in the same field as well. I've definitely seen that where I've sort of, came originally from, a large group that had an advertising agency, having that background's really interesting, and you get some really good connections across lots of different fields, which is really important.
Yeah, good advice.
Cool.
So I think I'm just going to jump into the questions around the metrics then, as
Yeah,
we
of
keep alluding
course.
to them. I'm sure the listeners
Yeah.
are aching to know what we're going to talk about today. So there is a lot of debate in our industry about CX metrics. Have made no secret of the fact that I think it's become a problem how we've obsessed, so not me personally, but businesses have obsessed with the metrics and the measurement side and have not focused on the action. So I'm interested to know, because I'm not saying metrics are useless, I think they absolutely are part of the story. What do you think the most useful metrics are for customer experience, and why?
So, I mean, as you alluded to there are so many CX metrics, and the strengths and weaknesses do really vary depending on the brand using them as well. So, a key thing to really think about as an organization is to really make sure you've got a clearly defined metric structure. So, we sort of say that's the basis of any good CX program. So, what I mean by that is sort of where you're looking at metrics, for example, to track performance within CX programs. They sit across 3 different levels. So they'll break down as key customer metrics, so as you know, providing that overarching basis for really understanding how how customers perceive their interactions with and that brand, and then more importantly the impact of their behaviors as well, so be that based on single interactions or across the whole relationship. And the metrics that really sort of most commonly used there are NPS, as we know, CSAT and CES. So all metrics we're all really familiar with, but where brands really think of and think that they should be is having that key customer metric, and that being the one that they focus everything on. And actually there's 2 layers down from that. So then there's really importantly the top line metrics. So these are the ones that help you understand, key outcomes, for example, of interaction or even relationship as well, which is really important. And then whether customers got what they wanted from that brand. And when you think about that, it's really interesting to think, is that both rationally and emotionally, that's a really key area. So the examples of those sort of metrics that we commonly recommend, and as I said, we recommend our client have one, and then two probably top line metrics as part of that as well, and that'll be things like emotional outcome, preference, purchase retention. Yeah, so they're the sort of, as I would say, those top line metrics. But then quite often people forget about the third layer, which is those operational metrics as well. So the most granular level of detail, those operational metrics really provide insight into both the drivers of customer experience as well as the indicators of its impact on customers. And that impact point, to your point earlier on, is so important. So these could be anything from financial metrics, closed loop metrics, general operational metrics that you have within the business. Yeah, so I think what probably I'm trying to allude to is the fact that to ensure it's done in a structured way, a metric framework is absolutely necessary to help you get that consistency. But really, make sure you've got a good idea. So no more than 2 to 4 metrics, and really try and stick to that typical one headline primary customer metric, but don't have it as its own.
So let's dive a little bit further into those for anyone who's not familiar with the terms we're using. So NPS, Net Promoter Score, what is that all about?
So, I mean, Net Promoter Score has been around for an awfully long time. Obviously, likelihood to recommend, which I think is a good metric to use. And there's so many businesses and sectors that use it, and it works really well. But I think where NPS sort of exploded is, people thought it would work across everything, and it just really doesn't. There are organisations that it doesn't work across, and that sort of question doesn't work. So it's obviously the most widely used, as we've said earlier, and it really does, I think, serve a good purpose. But for me, it just can't be that standalone metric.
And I think I read some research about like the intention to do something differently doesn't actually necessarily translate to them doing anything differently. So recommendation as an example, it's an
Yeah.
intention to do it. Does it actually, can you actually like track and measure whether or not it occurred as a result? Is there a way of crossing those data streams, not to rely entirely on NPS, but to actually actively track what behavior does change as a result of pulling levers in the customer experience, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. I think definitely, making sure you've got a good suite of analytical tools, internally, and that you're using analytics to really understand that and drill down is really important. And as I said, you just can't rely on it as an overall score that drives everything. And I've seen organizations, typically, for example, like utilities companies, for example, that, it's the one question they ask. They might ask an open-ended question after that, but they're basing everything on that, and even down to frontline teams being incentivized on that, which we see less of these days, but it's still quite prominent in terms of people being incentivized on that score.
And then let's move to CES, so customer effort score.
Yes.
For anyone who's not familiar, what are the advantages of using that as part of your suite of metrics?
I think it's because it really asks customers, how to the sort of rating of using products and services on a very difficult to sort of very easy scale. I think that's where there is a huge focus of actually being able to show that you've got that opportunity for customers to get to, really understand the question in a bit more detail as well. So, it really does ask questions, doesn't it, of what they think of that product and service overall. And very difficult, very easy is it's so easy to understand. Whereas when you think back to NPS, likelihood to recommend, okay, well, I'm not sure, would I recommend it? It's not the same question. So it is very different. And, widely, customer effort score is something that we use with quite a lot of our clients on their programs. And it really does serve a good purpose.
And they're very keen on that one in contact centers, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's sort of rightfully so. It's definitely been a good metric for the contact centers.
And then customer satisfaction, CSAT, as it's known.
Yes.
I suppose that's quite obvious, isn't it? How
Yeah,
satisfied were you with this touch
exactly.
point, moment of interaction, product service element? But you mentioned a word that some of our listeners might not be so familiar with that comes with satisfaction, which is the key drivers.
Yes.
And understanding that, how do you understand based on customer satisfaction how important things are and the influence that they have over actual customer behavior?
No, really good question. And I think that, obviously, again, it relates back to really like understanding what the relationship is between drivers and then customer behavior as well. So like really drilling down into that a bit more detail. And again, it doesn't work as a standalone metric. That's the point of all of these. I don't think they were ever designed to be standalone metrics. So connect data together, and we've got an awful lot of thought leadership on how you should be bringing different data together, whether that's operational data, whether that's financial data. When you do that, you can really got the opportunity to create that sort of single source customer view that's really important.
Just thinking back to my days in business running customer experience programs, I think metrics were always, I say, from the insights perspective, it was something that I'd use as an input to shaping the CX design process. So what data and information did we have that could tell us perhaps where there was an issue, or looking at kind of complaints in key areas. But when it came to proving return on investment, when we changed something, for me, it was about being able to take a whole heap of metrics and put measures in place and track them as the new initiative launched, and then having benchmark comparisons to stores. This is back in my retail days where we hadn't done the same thing. So we'd look for like basically a mirror image business that we could compare. If we did this customer experience initiative compared to the other one, what's the difference? And we tracked all the metrics, and you could see a difference between the same kind of performance traditionally the same kind of operational performance traditionally, you could see there was a marked improvement. And then being able to relate that to the increase in sales and the decrease in costs of a store operation made it therefore really, I say easy, it wasn't easy, really clear what the benefit of value was. But I know a lot of people, especially when I see them talking on LinkedIn and having these conversations, are really struggling because it seems like you have to prove the ROI of customer experience
Yeah,
as a theme.
yeah.
Where does that come from? So
Well, do you know what? I mean, proving ROI is so essential. Look, it's something that businesses do nowhere near enough, and it's something that I think is key to securing CX budget as well. You know, if you don't prove the ROI of a CX program, then how are you going to get that budget and grow that budget, which you need to get closer to the customer? So I think when you sort of think what the role of customer experience is in organizations, obviously it's, you know, it should be the lifeline of the business, shouldn't it? It should be the thing that helps businesses fail or succeed. But in order to really prove that ROI, then I think you need to think about analyzing which experience factors really sort of drive that biggest change. And by that, I'm thinking, you know, in customer sentiment, for example, more importantly, which drives biggest change in key business outcomes, you know, so causes customers to spend less or more or leave or stay. And that type of analysis is probably the thing that can really drill down and prove ROI, because it can look at things like operational performance, which drives customer sentiment, and then which metrics are used most as well and which are most important. So yeah, I think proving that ROI is difficult, but if you use the right tools, you can put a financial value to it, and it is that simple. You know, really showing by, and we've done some work with an airline recently where we showed them, you know, just a small increase in NPS score gave them a financial value in terms of how they managed to grow as a business, and that's really that's really surprising. You know, you take that to the board, you take that to your chief financial officer, and they're going to wake up and they're going to say, right, wow, you know, if we can cascade that across the business and get all of the employees bought into that, and they can see just by their actions, their small actions, what can happen in terms of, you know, financial success for the business, it's really powerful.
So how did they track that then? So watching Net Promoter increase as they deployed initiatives and then tracking sales data or retention data?
Exactly.
Or?
Yeah, and it was all done through existing data as well. So it was all through using analytics, all through existing data, which is great because then, you know, it's not something they had to do. It was just through a level of analytics. It gave them that better understanding of how experience and expectations changes have impacted the customer, really. So yeah, it was really exciting. And I think the more we're getting asked about that a lot more now, organizations just want to show it in a truly simple value, and that is just by putting a pound sign to it.
It's fascinating though, because I guess when I was demonstrating the cost of bad experience, you could look at complaints, cost to serve those complaints. You could look at refunds and other data points that didn't necessarily cross into the realms of any of those that we've mentioned, like CSAT or NPS or customer effort scores. Do you think perhaps that focusing on trying to prove the return on investment for a program, as in like a measurement program, might be part of the problem, as opposed to return on investment of actioning initiatives?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think especially we've seen this year, budgets are obviously squeezed in every area of businesses, and you know, quite often we've seen that that CX falls into marketing budgets now, which have obviously been hugely squeezed this year. So yeah, I think there is an element of people saying, you know, what's the actual value of our transactional program, for example. But when you put that value against it and you show them that small change can increase things, then I think it still proves its worth within organizations.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So what would you say the best way to engage and influence the C-suite is when it comes to data, insight and metrics?
Oh, that's a great question. So, I mean, I do think it's sort of showing that ROI, and really showing them what the value CX can bring. So, I also think there's a huge area of making sure they understand as well. Like, as customer experience professionals, and especially within organizations, it's our job to educate and really make sure they understand what it is, because
Mm.
otherwise it's something that they see, they don't really get, they don't really engage with. And actually, we've got a nice story of so we work with Nationwide, obviously, building society, all about members, very customer centric, and their engagement from the C-suite is incredible because it comes from the CEO. So we went to a conference earlier this year, the only conference we managed to get to this year, um, and the CEO was presenting, and the first thing he flashed up on screen was the dashboard, and that dashboard showing all the customer feedback, our dashboard that we've created, showing customer feedback. And he said, I look at it as the first thing I do when I wake up. I look at it as the first thing I do, when I get into the office. It's exactly what I'm looking at all the time. I want to see what the customer feedback's doing. So by the CEO driving that culture, that think customer centric culture that he's done through the business, it's engaged the whole of the C-suite, because everyone's thinking, well, the CEO is so passionate about it. It's the first thing he does when he gets out of bed. Then I think that's a key part of it. So really making sure you sort of get those senior stakeholders on board is really important. And quite often, I think that when they, when organizations say, right, we're going to put a CX program in place, that's fantastic, absolutely do that. But actually, just as important as getting the right software is how you engage your employees with it. And it's got to land at the right time, it's got to be launched correctly, it's got to make sure it sort of creates traction within those few months. Otherwise it just becomes another system, another process, another mechanism of feedback, and it gets lost, unfortunately.
I agree with you on that. So just to round this off then, what would you say your top tips would be for women in CX out there who want to turn those insights that they're already gathering into action?
I think so. If I think about it, first of all, sort of from an agency side, it's about really knowing your client well, and knowing their business well. So, you need to, as their insight strategic partner, you need to really make recommendations that are appropriate to them. So the better you get to know your client and the more you can workshop with them and things like that, the better it is. So yeah, take time to know your client, their priorities, what's keeping them up at night, what will help, that will help you identify other opportunities as well, which is great. But obviously, make sure as an agency, you really know them, and you're being realistic with that as well. So realistic in terms of driving action from insight. You can't suggest something that won't be possible for the business. You need to make sure you're realistic in that. And then I suppose sort of lastly, I would say, as an organization, I'd say short term versus long term. So often think about what recommendations you can do straight away and what other ones you need to build momentum for. They're going to take longer to go from there. Yeah. And then I suppose the only other point I'd say on that is definitely nothing works in isolation. So as we alluded to earlier, you need to connect data, you need to make sure you know more and more about your customers, get that single source customer view at a real individual level, which really then does help you to sort of commercialize customer experience.
Oh, and when you say single customer view, what do you actually mean by that? Because I know a lot of people have different definitions.
So for us, it's really about thinking, well, what does that customer want, but what do we know from all different areas of the business? So connecting brand data, connecting as I said, financial data before, employee data, because obviously they're the biggest source of knowledge on your customers. So use feedback from your employee program as well. But really create that one source understanding so that from a personalized level what that customer expects and what they want. And obviously you can segment those and all those things, but try and create that one single source of view instead of having all these multiple programs running and no idea of what connects everything together and what it actually means for the customer.
And do you think that happens through CRM?
Yeah, so I think I think potentially, some of that will come through CRM, some of it will come through analytics, I said earlier on, some of it comes of just making sure your agencies are joined up as well. So making sure your agencies are working together. Really interestingly, this week I presented to one of our clients, and I presented with another agency, and although we used to do that an awful lot, I don't think clients, ask for that or expect that quite as much as they should. So get your agencies working together better, and make sure that they really are running those programs together, and that you're using findings and insights from both.
Just my final thought on that was, I always remember the holy grail for retail was this single customer view. But to retail, it meant you've been able to move from having one kind of targeted marketing communication conversation with the masses to the next step, which would be segmenting those masses and having conversations with them depending on what they bought and their preferences that these data kind of sets and systems would be collecting over time. But I remember that we were aiming for there was this one-to-one conversation. So who you are, what you buy, your behavior would be understood at a data and analytics level. So you could be targeted with relevance in terms of promotion, in terms of personalized websites, for example. How far do you think we are off that?
I think we're a little way, to be honest. I think there's still more to be done. And look, things like the rise in AI and things like that, we will get there. And obviously this year we've seen, a huge sort of surge to digital, haven't we? Sort of faster than anyone would have expected in the next 5 years, probably. So look, I don't think we're miles off, but we still have a way to go. And I think a lot of that is really about thinking about your data strategy, and thinking, I'm going to maximize what data I've got, what data my partners have got, and then then I've got more of ability to create that single source customer view.
Super duper. All right then. Well, thanks ever so much. It was fun to have a challenging debate about our differing viewpoints on insight and metrics. It's been really helpful, I'm sure, for the audience to learn a little bit more about what some of those terms means and the differences in how you can apply them in order to drive action. So I'd just like to say thank you ever so much for joining us on the show today, and I hope you have a very Merry Christmas.
Thanks, Claire. You too.
Take care. Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Women in CX podcast with me, Clare Muscutt. If you enjoyed the show, please drop us a like, subscribe and leave a review on whichever platform you're watching or listening on. And if you want to know more, please join us at womenincx.community and follow the Women in CX page on LinkedIn. Join us again next week, where I'll be talking about employee experience with a woman who spent 10 years travelling the world taking care of employees who are creating magical experiences for guests at Cirque du Soleil. See you all next week.